Alright, grade 11, so this is going to be a quick video. This is just getting the idea of questions in trig, like we had from grade 10 in the first video that I showed you, where we're working with finding the right quadrant, drawing a 90-degree triangle, right angle triangle, and then doing pythag and working out questions from that. So this example, if cos 20 degrees equals t, determine the values of the following in terms of t. So it's a little bit different to your normal type. So in this type, the clue has been given to you, cos 20 equals t. That's telling you already you're working in quadrant 1 because 20 degrees is in quadrant 1 between 0 and 90 degrees. So they've told you where to work with the 20 degrees. Then t is actually representing a number. So remember, whole numbers are over 1, so I've written as t over 1. For cos, that would be adjacent over hypotenuse, and so that is already also telling me two of my sides within my triangle. So moving on now, so my adjacent over hypotenuse from 20 degrees in my triangle in my first quadrant is the x value and the r value, the hypotenuse. So to work out the third side using pythag, remember it's x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So my x value along the x-axis is t squared. I don't know the y value, but it will be positive because we're in quadrant 1. Everything in quadrant 1, the scale is positive, is equal to r squared is 1 squared. So I've got t squared plus y squared equals 1. 1 squared is 1. So then y squared is going to be 1 minus t squared. And then from that point, I've got a square root. So y is going to be plus minus the square root of 1 minus t squared. But because we're in first quadrant, the y value must be positive. Now, because we're working with a binomial here, we can't square root pieces of it. It's got to stay 1 minus t squared. Alright, so here's our completed triangle, and what I've done as well is I've just filled in this third angle in the triangle, because if I've got 20, 90, then using angles of a triangle, I've got 70. So that just helps us simplify things a little bit. It also stops you having to use co-ratios in this type of question. Alright, so we've dealt with the if cos 20 equals t. Now we're going to work with determining the values of a to e here in terms of t. So when they say in terms of t, it means we don't want a sine, cos, or tan at all left over, or an angle. We just want something with t's. Okay, so for the first one, cos 160. The problem with 160 is that it's greater than 90 degrees, and nothing in my triangle here is greater than 90 degrees. Alright, so I've got to reduce this using my cost diagram. So 160 degrees sits in sine's quadrant, 90 to 180, and it's 180 minus 20. But because we're in the second quadrant, sine's quadrant, it's going to be negative cos of 20 degrees. Again, if you're still a bit rusty with this, in your calculator you can check cos 160, what decimal it is, and then negative cos 20 should get you the same decimal. If it doesn't, you've done your reduction wrong. Alright, so now wherever you see a cos 20, even just from the question, they said cos 20 is t. So wherever I see a cos 20, I can replace it with a t. So in this case, I'm going to have a negative t. Otherwise, you could have gone to your triangle. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse from 20 degrees. Alright, but we're going to use the triangle a little bit more in the next one. So the next one says cos negative 200. Now remember, cos is not affected by a negative angle. Then you can go to your reductions. Alternatively, you could have just added 360 to the negative angle. Here though, with the reductions, 200 sits in tan's quadrant. It's 180 plus 20 degrees. You're going to find it's going to give you numbers from the triangle. Alright, so when we're working with this, because it's in tan's quadrant, it's going to be negative cos of 20, which we've already said is negative t, because cos 20 is t, so it's a negative t. Sine 250. All right, so sine 250 sits in tan's quadrant over there. It is going to then be negative sine, and you've got to ask yourself 180 plus what is going to get me 250? It's 70. Now here you have an option. One option is to use a co-ratio and change this to negative cos 20. If you haven't caught the co-ratio bit at this point, then forget about that and go into your triangle, because you have 70 degrees. So from your 70 degrees in your triangle, we can go, what is sine opposite over hypotenuse from the 70? The 70 is your starting point. It's like a GPS coordinate, starting at 70. So opposite over hypotenuse ends up being t over 1. So if you want the opposite of hypotenuse, then that's fine. You can have it there, but it's from 70 degrees. But here you can then say, well, that's negative t over 1, which is just negative t. And hopefully you realize, hang on, that is the same as the negative cos 20. So just because you're going from a different side, it still ends up being an equivalent ratio because of that 90-degree relationship between sine and cos. 20 and 70 make 90. All right, then for D is sine 20. This is so super easy. So because I see at 20 degrees, I know I can use my triangle. So 20 or 70, jump to your triangle. Sine from 20 degrees is opposite over hypotenuse. So what is opposite 20? Sorry, let's find it. Is your 1 minus t squared under the root, and hypotenuse is 1. So your answer is just 1 minus t squared. Tan 20 means from 20 degrees, you're going to be going opposite over adjacent. Opposite from 20 is 1 minus t squared under the root, and your adjacent is t. And that's your final answer. So it's the same process as the previous pythag questions. It's just a lot quick to find your quadrant, because they tell you it's the first quadrant in this case, 20 degrees. If they told you it's 160 degrees, you go to second quadrant. So wherever you're working, you can go to that quadrant. But the majority of them, probably 98% of them, are in the first quadrant. And then just remember, we don't want any sines, coses, or tans left over. You need to replace them with the letters from the triangle as per the questions. All right. So you can attempt this for exercise 8, page 128 in your Mind Action Series textbook. Question A, B, and C. D and E are the star ones, the more challenging ones. When I put the memo up, I will put the memo up for all questions. So it's completely up to you if you want to try those. But the most common types that you see are A, B, and C. That's the majority of the types. You're unlikely to see ones like D and E, but it's not impossible. But A, B, and C, definite. All right. Good luck. Enjoy.